Hey guys, Rob here, and today you join me for part 4 of saving a Ferrari F40, a sad eBay story. And after the last part 3 where I showed you all the parts that were received and ordered in for this model, it's time to start work on it. So I've decided to actually start with the interior on this model because I really enjoy doing highly detailed interiors. And I have been doing a little bit of work up until this filming date, and that's mainly the interior tub. So this just comes in a greyish type plastic with a texture molded into it to sort of look like carbon fiber, but not really. So what I've done is I have lined the whole interior, if this will show, in Scale Motorsports 1/12 scale carbon fiber decal. Now I've done this in lots and lots of pieces. I've done the outside sills as well. So the whole interior has been decaled in that 1/12 scale decals. I then clear coated the whole lot in 2K clear coat because it's nice and thick. And then when that dried, I actually sprayed a Tamiya flat clear over the top of it. Because obviously the interior of the F40, the carbon fiber, is not gloss, it is a satin finish. So that took quite a bit of time to make all the pieces and apply them all. So that is what I've got done so far on the interior, because I do want to actually add some flocking, some carpeting to the rear bulkhead wall like the real F40. So I just wanted to do all the carbon decals first and get that job out of the way. Now I've been looking at a lot of pictures online and also using the Amalgam 1/8 scale model as a reference. I've got some pictures here. This is the Amalgam 1/8 scale Ferrari F40, and I'm basically using some of those pictures as a reference. Now there seems to be a lot of different carbon fiber textures on the interiors and the seats of the real F40s, everything from normal carbon to carbon Kevlar to Kevlar. So being that I'm building the street version, I just wanted to do it all in the normal black and grey carbon fiber, which I think will look really good. Now we're also going to work on the dashboard in this episode as well, and before I go too far with this, I'm actually going to just spray this black. I am going to add a few accessories to this. I've got a couple of photo etch pieces to add to this. I've just left the old decals in there. I couldn't remove all of that, but that's all going to get covered up anyway. So yeah, going to add a few extra details and do a couple of little tricks on the gauges here. So we'll get to that as well. We're also going to do the center console, which is pretty much all in flocking as well, and a few other bits and pieces as well. We're going to tackle the steering wheel, which has got some photo etch pieces, and yeah, so that's basically what we are going to tackle in this episode. So also with the seats, I'm still yet to decal the back of the seats, so probably going to do these in a Kevlar carbon fiber. I'm not quite sure yet, but you can see that they've got a little bit of a texture to them. So when I give these a bit of clean and apply all the decals to them, I'll do the same thing. I'll coat these in a 2K clear. It'll just make them nice and smooth, and then I can spray the Tamiya flat clear over the top of them just to take the gloss off. But I'm definitely going to add some red flocking powder to the seats, because these are in a cloth or an Alcantara in the real car. So rather than just paint them, these are in a molded red plastic. That's how they come from the factory from Pocker. But yeah, I think these will look a lot better if I do those in red flocking powder. And of course we're going to be running the full red Saybelt racing harnesses on this as well. So we'll see how far we get in this episode. So we may not get to the seats, but today we're basically going to focus on getting the flocking done on the interior, some bits and pieces, some details added to the dash, center console, steering wheel, get those painted and flocked as well. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to start on the dashboard. So this basically has a few extra little details added to it. Now the original kit just has a little sticker for the air conditioning vents. Now I've actually got some little photo etch pieces which will eventually be painted, but that shows, I'm not sure whether the camera picks it up, but you can see this has actually got the opening vents in it. So I'm going to be attaching those onto the dashboard, glue those on, and rather than use the factory decal and the factory trim, I've got some detail parts here from Scale Details. So this is actually a photo etched metal instrument gauge surround. This has a nice little raised edge around the main dials as well. So I'm going to be using that, and they also provide a more accurate set of decals. So they've either got the white faced gauges or the black. I'm going to be just going with the standard black, and the problem with the old ones was that the gauges didn't line up with the holes. So this is a more accurate piece, and I'm actually going to be using a piece of, if I can find it, a piece of clear acetate. So rather than just the gauge surround going on top, I'm actually going to add a piece of clear acetate between the gauge surround, just to give the look of glass on the front of the gauges. So that's going to be the couple of detail bits that I'm going to do to the dashboard. I have basically glued in the little three pieces that hold the three center gauges. You'll see why I've done that, but I've just removed the old decals off those first, and I've actually glued those in just from behind so they don't move. But the next thing is to go and give this a clean with wax and grease remover, and I'm going to spray this in matte black to start with. Now some F40s have a greyish coloured cloth on the dashboard, and some actually have a black. Now the amalgam model that I'm using as a reference actually has a black cloth dashboard in the model, so I'm going to be using a black flocking powder on this one rather than the grey, and that goes to the rear bulkhead on the floor pan as well. That'll all be in black flocking. So I'm going to go and paint this bit first, and also the center console. So I've basically just given this a little bit of a clean up. Whenever you're going to repaint these plastic parts, it's always a good idea just to run a sanding block and take off any of the casting marks on the plastic, because it's going to be painted anyway. And I've got some detail parts for this as well. So I've got a nice little photo etched open gate there. That's all from Scale Motorsports. And the standard gear knob is just a piece of plastic chromed, which is pretty rubbish really. So another thing from Scale Motorsports is an actual little metal ball gear knob and a metal rod. So that is going to be used for the gear shifter. The handbrake handle is the standard pocker part, but I've actually again sanded the casting marks off that, and that will all get repainted as well. So I'm going to go and paint those couple of bits now outside, and I've just done a couple of tweaks to the factory steering wheel as well. Now this obviously had a casting mark all the way around the outside and on the inside. So what I've done there, I've just basically sanded that casting mark off, because I'm going to repaint this in matte black as well. And also the inside of the spokes had a little bit of casting lines on those as well. So I've cleaned all those up, as well as the actual steering column that had some casting marks on the side. And I've actually got some upgrades for the steering wheel as well. So again, from Scale Details in the US, I've got the little photo etched overlay piece for the Momo steering wheel, and that also comes with a little Ferrari horn cap button as well. Now that's going to be a little bit tricky to paint that one, but it's basically got the horse cast into that one. So what I actually might do, I might actually glue these on first before I paint that, and then we can go and paint those parts. So I've just made sure that that test fitted. I've used my little photo etched file to remove any of the little dags of the photo etch, and that will be glued in place. So let's just do that now. Now I'm using Bob Smith Industries Instacure super glue. This stuff works really good for metal and for plastic, so that will join these parts on really well. Just going to put a couple of little dobs on there and actually just use a toothpick just to move the glue around. Now you can actually buy the really tiny little nozzles, but I just do it this way. It's how I've always done it. Just move that glue around so that we've got enough for the photo etched part to stick. And it's just going to give the steering wheel a little bit of extra detail, make it look a little bit better. If I can pick that piece up. Now that fits around the raised section of the horn button, no problem at all. Just line that up. And there we go. As I said, it's probably a good idea to actually glue these parts on before you paint it, just so you don't have any sticking issues from the metal to the plastic. But that's basically in place now. So you can see that this actually got some little bolt heads cast into it, but I'm actually going to add some little silver bolts after I have already painted this part, just to give it a little bit more of a three-dimensional feel, and this will be easier just to paint all black now as well. And the horn button, I might actually leave that off for now because that's got some detail painting in it. So this is good to go. So I'm going to just go outside and give these a coat of black paint, and then I will rejoin you. Okay, so that is those parts painted. So I actually didn't show you, but I glued on those little photo etched vents just so it could be all sprayed at the same time. So that's all sprayed black. Obviously in the flocking process, I'm using black paint anyway, but some parts of this are not going to be flocked, which is why I painted it black now, especially these gauge inserts and the inside of the instrument pod. So that's painted. The center console is painted. There's not much to do to that really. That's ready to flock. Steering wheel, that is, I actually primed all these with a Tamiya primer just in the spray can, and then Tamiya matte black paint. So that is sprayed. And I also sprayed the gauge surround and also the handbrake handle. So those bits are done. What I'm going to do next is to actually add some decals, because you'll understand this in a minute, but I'm going to apply the 3 gauge decals just in this center section here. And I did order the original decal sheet. This is a new decal sheet because when I repaint the body, a lot of the decals will be removed. So, but this one does have a tiny little Momo decal as well. Now looking at some Ferrari F40s, some don't have a decal, it's just a plain wheel with the yellow Ferrari center cap. Some of them do have a little Momo decal on there at the top, and some have it at the bottom near the bottom of the middle spoke. So I'm actually going to apply the Momo decal to mine. Just because I'm a fan of Momo. I had a lot of Momo steering wheels in my real cars when I was younger, so I'm going to put it on there anyway, and if I don't like it I'll just remove it. So that's what we're going to do now. We're just going to apply some decals to these parts. So it's the same as always. Put the decal in a dish of warm water. I've just got very lukewarm water here at the moment, so we'll get that one in there to start with. And yeah, I don't know what these pocket decals are like. Obviously these are quite old. I'm sure this was printed a very long time ago, but we'll see how we go anyway. But yeah, as far as the gauges go, I tried something on a custom Pagani model not too long ago, and it worked really, really well. So I'm going to do the same process on this one, and I'll show you what I mean once these decals are dry, because I definitely want the decals to be dry before I do this process. So we'll just cut those ones out. Now I am using a reference photo off the internet for the actual gauge locations, because the original instruction booklet that came with this kit, it's really quite basic compared to the newer Lamborghini model kits from Poca. I just photocopied this one off. Someone had actually uploaded it to the internet, so that helps out immensely. But yeah, the actual instructions are very, very vague, shall we say, compared to the newer kits. Now that decal is actually on the back of my skin. It came off the paper really easily. There we go. I hope I don't ruin this decal. Just going to use my magnifier off camera here just so that I can see the lettering, because it is so small. Now I'm just going to do this off camera with my magnifier. Now it's actually a little bit too long for the length of the spoke there, so I'm actually going to move that to a location that I have seen on some pictures of the real cars, which is the top of the spoke. As you can see up there, very, very small decal anyway. And I'm just using a Q-tip just to remove some of the moisture from underneath the decal. So you can see there, it's only very, very tiny, and obviously the decal is a little bit glossy. So if I decide I want to keep this decal, I just spray these parts with a bit of Tamiya flat clear, just out of a spray can, and then that makes it all blend in. So that's that part anyway. Now I'll just have a look at the decal order on the computer, just because we've got oil, petrol level or fuel, and maybe that's oil temperature, oil, fuel, and oil temperature. So we'll just see which ones go where. Just have a look on there. Okay, so looking on the internet, it's actually oil temperature first, then oil level, and then the fuel off to the side. So that is what we're going to do now. So get that one in the water as well. These didn't take too long to come off the backing paper. It's always good if you've got some new decals that you've never used before to actually just do a tester with a decal that you don't plan on using, just to see, because sometimes they come off the backing paper really, really quick, and then they can curl up in the water as well, and then you've got basically a ruined decal. But hopefully this won't happen with these ones. You can always test it anyway and see if it slides with your finger. That doesn't slide quite yet, so we'll just hold that in there a little bit longer. There we go. And because this is going into a round hole, I'll actually just slide it off the backing paper a little bit. Just so I can grab it with my tweezers, and then I'm going to position it inside if I can. Now sometimes I just use the point of my knife, just ever so delicately, just to maneuver that around. Not using a lot of pressure, otherwise you will pierce the decal. And then I'm just using a Q-tip in there to remove any of the moisture from underneath the decal. So that's it, oil temperature. Now the next one in the middle is just the oil pressure, I would say that would be. But yeah, obviously the real gauges actually have a glass over the top of them now. Very hard to cut an accurate little circle out of clear acetate to actually cover that gauge. So what I'm going to do with this new technique is to actually show you how to replicate a glass lens over a gauge. But I may just have to let these dry overnight before I do that. I don't want to risk the decals getting damaged by this method. So it's getting late in the afternoon here, so I may just finish off these bits and pieces and then rejoin you tomorrow so that I can try this method. So I know a lot of you have been eagerly anticipating this episode. Work is really busy for me at the moment in my construction business. So it's really hard to find a time to work on these models, and they do take a lot of time, especially this one. I said right from the start that I didn't want to rush this particular model build because the F40 is my favorite car ever. If I had lots of money in the bank, I would buy myself an F40, but a 1/8 scale version is all I can afford. So, but I'm working hard to keep the episodes coming for you guys. So that is the oil pressure gauge. So they're actually not too bad, the actual printed decals, if that will focus. As far as the clarity goes on them, they're not too bad. It's just that there's a few other little toyish features with these model kits. So if we can just make all those little elements a little bit better, especially like those little photo etched vents, they're obviously in the closed position, but that looks just so much better than the factory. The factory just included a little sticker, like you can see here, these little decals. Now that looks nothing like the real car, so definitely worth getting the photo etched set to do those vents. It just makes it look so much better. All right, we've got one more gauge to go, which is the fuel level, and that's come off as well, and we'll get that one into position as well. Again, just going to use, this is actually doesn't have the tip on it anymore. This is an older blade, so it's not going to pierce the decal, and it just helps to maneuver it around, especially when you're applying a decal in a hole or a cavity like that. That looks pretty straight to me. Again, we'll straighten that up. Okay, so that's the three decals on there. So we've got oil temperature, oil pressure, and fuel level there. Now I am actually going to leave these dry overnight, so I will actually show you the technique that I'm using tomorrow, but I will tell you what it is now. So I use this glue a lot, micro scale, micro crystal clear. Now I use this to glue all the windows in my models. Because it is a water-based glue, it is pretty strong, but it doesn't have any fogging or hazing associated with super glues. But this was actually designed for model makers who build model planes as well. So you can actually make your own windows. So if you had small little windows in the side of a model plane, you can actually use a toothpick, dip it in the glue, and then run it round inside the window to fill the hole, and it will dry crystal clear like a window. Now what I did on my Pagani build not too long ago is that the headlight details were really basic, and it didn't actually have a headlight lens in there. So what I did was actually fill up the headlight bucket with the crystal clear glue, which is white. It looks like wood glue. It's basically a white glue. And when it dried, it actually dries crystal clear, but it has the depth, depending on how deep your pour is, it gives you that depth like it's actually got a glass lens in there. So when these dry overnight, I'm actually going to drop the crystal clear glue into these holes level with where the edge of the bezel would be. You do have to prop it up in an upright position because it is glue. It is a liquid, so if you put it on an angle, it'll just run out. So I will make some little props and prop the dashboard up, and I'll actually fill these little holes, and it will look like they have glass lenses over the top of it. So stay tuned for that one. But yeah, I'm definitely going to let these little decals dry overnight before I attempt that. Now what I might do here as well, this is just from Scale Details as well. It's just a much clearer instrumentation cluster, and it's got some of the correct lights on it. Now this, I'm not sure whether this is a decal. I think it's just printed on a piece of paper, but that doesn't bother me. I'm not too worried about using it as a decal. I don't want to use a decal in there anyway, so I'm just going to cut this to shape with the scissors. I just want to test fit all of these parts first, and because I have to flock the dashboard, I don't want to glue this in at this stage anyway. So these are my trusty, they're actually dressmaking scissors for cutting fabric, but I use these all the time. Okay, so that is the instrumentation. So that's going to sit in there like that. I will actually glue that in, but not yet. Now I've got a piece of clear acetate. Now I'll give this a clean before it's glued in as well. Now obviously we'll get into how that's glued in later, but that is basically going to sit in front of the gauges so that it looks like the gauges have a glass face, and then the metal trim is going to go in the top of that. So that's basically how the dashboard is going to look. Now each of those layers will get glued in there, but as you can see, it's going to need a little bit of positioning in there. But as you can see, that looks much better than the factory setup, and really there's not that much work involved in that. So that's a really easy one. Those two white holes that you see, they're actually red warning lamps that go in there. They come with the kit, so the posts of those will be trimmed off, and then they'll just be glued in position as well. But that really does make it look so much better, having that layer of acetate, clear acetate in between the gauges and the underside of that metal panel. So yeah, really happy with how that looks. So that's going to be how the dashboard goes together. Might kind of actually look cool with the white gauges in there as well, but I haven't seen any pictures of F40s with white gauges, so we'll keep those off to the side. And yeah, so that is basically it. I'm going to let those decals dry, as I said, overnight, and then I will rejoin you tomorrow. Okay, so I'm joining you the next day. My decals have dried in there, and now I'm going to show you this technique to make the clear lenses. So I'm just using, as I said, the micro crystal clear. Now it is basically like the consistency of a wood glue. So what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to just put some on the end of a toothpick, and I'm just going to let it drop in there and fill it up. Now it will level itself out as it dries. Maybe I should zoom in for you guys now. Where are we? Okay, so as you can see there, I've just let it drop off the toothpick. We'll move it around so it touches the sides. I don't want to put too much in there, but I'll just let it run off the end of the toothpick. And that's why I just made some little legs for the side of the dashboard, just so it's sitting upright, because as I said, the glue is a liquid, and if it is on an angle while it's drying, it will just run out. So that's what I'm doing there. Now I'm just going to run that around the edge also, just so it makes contact with the edge. And just add a little bit more in there as well. Same with that one there, and that one there too. Now, as I said, this will dry absolutely crystal clear, even though it is white now. And it will look like a clear glass lens in there as well. So again, this is going to have to dry overnight. Obviously, it depends on how deep the glue is as to how long it is going to dry. But this is probably 2 millimeters thick. Where I am here in Australia, it is pretty humid every day, so this should dry in 24 hours. So I'm just making sure that they're all the same. That one's a little bit lower than the other ones. There's no hard and fast rule for this method. Let's just go by your own judgment. Put another drop in there, and that one as well. And I think that is about it. So let me just have a look at that. Now I don't want the glue to dry right up on the edge of that recess, so I'm just going to remove some of that glue with a clean toothpick. Just to make sure that when it dries, gives me a nice edge. Obviously it's easier to underfill it than overfill it. As you can see there, it's just white glue basically, but it will dry, as I said, absolutely crystal clear, hence the name of the glue. Just going to add some more in that one as well. I think that one is a little bit lower than the other ones. And then you can just move the glue around, make sure it touches the edge. Now this is something that you probably wouldn't do on a 1/18 scale, because you probably wouldn't notice it if you did this on an interior of a much smaller model, but definitely on a larger 1/8 scale model like this, it will make a difference. So just cleaning up those edges. And I think that is about level all the way around. Maybe that one can do with a little bit more as well. As I said, it is a liquid, so it will self-level itself. Just put a little bit more in each of those as well. Now, from my experience with this crystal clear, it does not really shrink. So you've got no problems with it shrinking, so what you put in there should be enough. Just going to add a bit more to that one there. Always hard doing this on camera sometimes, because you can't put as much concentration or look at it as much while I'm trying to film, but definitely put a bit too much in that one there. So I'm going to scoop some of that out. Alright, and give that one a little bit of a clean up around the edge as well. I mean, it will dry completely clear, so you won't see any of those extra little bits, but rather than having a lump of glue there, I'd rather just remove it at this stage while it's wet. Take a bit out of that one as well. I think it's too full. Okay, almost there. So Hopefully this is not too boring for you guys while I'm doing this, but rather than time lapse it or speed it up, I just want to show you the process in full, just so you can see what I'm doing. And that will probably do. I'm pretty happy with that. They all look basically level to me. So that's it. Obviously it looks completely white at this stage now, completely covered the decals, but as I said, that will dry completely clear. And again, I'm going to leave that to dry until it is completely dry or clear. So probably maybe 24 hours. So we'll continue the progress tomorrow. Okay, so I'm actually joining you 2 days later because this has not completely dried. It's pretty good, as you can see. It's almost clear. It's just got a little bit of cloudiness around the very edges of the gauges, but you can see what I mean. So if I hold it in certain lights, it looks like it's actually now got a glass lens over the front of those gauges, which I'm really happy with the result with that one. When it's really shallow, 24 hours should be enough to dry, but because this was maybe 2 millimeters, 2.5 millimeters thick, the crystal clear glue, it's taken about 2 days to dry to get to this point. But as you can see, it looks fantastic. It looks like it's got glass in front of the gauges now. So I just wanted to show you that one. I'm actually just going to wait a little bit longer until this is completely dried. It feels dry on the top, but it's just obviously all the air or whatever's got to come out of the glue for it to be absolutely completely dry. But you can see the results. It looks fantastic like that. And while I'm talking about that crystal clear glue, I also did that to the steering wheel. So just an update on the steering wheel. I did a couple of things off camera. One, you'll notice all the little decals on the stalks, on the indicator turn signals and the windscreen wiper over, oh, there we go, on that side there. Maybe you can see that. Now that was some tiny little decals I had left out of the Poca Lamborghini build. So I was actually able to use those on those little stalks, and rather than use that little detailed photo etch piece, which I was going to use, as you can see there with a little painted horse, it was pretty hard. Oh, there you go, got a little horse on there. I decided to use the factory decal out of the Poca decal set, and I actually applied that decal, and then I applied some more of the crystal clear in the divot on top of the decal. So you can see that that is on its way to drying. You can start to see the yellow color coming through. So I actually did this one about 4 hours ago. So when that completely dries, it'll give the look of a clear layer or clear gloss layer over the top of the Ferrari horn button, and I'm pretty happy with how that will look. Once that finishes off, I will actually add the little rivets all the way around. I'm just waiting on some new photo etched cutters to arrive. I have been using the Tamiya ones for quite a while, but they just either seem to be blunt or just yeah, not working too well on trying to remove these little rivets. So I've ordered a new set of Vallejo photo etch pliers, so they should be here in a couple of days, so we'll see how they work out. But these are the sheets of all the little rivets and bolt heads. Now these are actually from an eBay seller called Tremonia. I'll put a link in the description. He sells a lot of photo etched parts for different cars, and I've actually got another one of his sets here which I showed you in part 3. Now this is for the Poca 1/8 Ferrari F40, and this has got all the real proper mesh grills for the front and the rear, brake rotors. So yeah, same company that makes these little universal rivet sheets and the bigger sheets as well. So that's what I'm going to be using for the little bolts on the steering wheel. So that's pretty good. Now I just want to show you a couple of other things I've done before we get into the flocking. So we'll start with the dashboard. One of the major problems that I saw was the three heater or air conditioning vents. Now when they fit into the dashboard standard like that, that's as far as they pushed in. So they're actually supposed to be very close to the underside of the dashboard, and you can see that little molded lug on the bottom of that piece as well. So what I've done here to make it more accurate, I've actually cut that back bracket down lower. I've just taken 3 millimeters out of that, and I've also cut a little bit off the length of the top here as well. So what that enables to do is to actually push up further so that those vents now sit tight up underneath the dashboard. So that's more accurate to the real car. Really easy modification to do. So that's one of the mods that I have done. Now the other one I've done is the little switch panel. Now this little switch panel goes onto that part of the dashboard there after it's flocked. I just painted that matte black, and as you can see, again, I've added some little decals for the demister and the little light buttons and switches there as well. So these were just leftover small decals from the Poca Lamborghini build. Now another thing I've done was to glue the gear shifter ball onto the shaft. Now these parts are from Scale Details in the US. I just got those through eBay as well. So I simply just glued the stem into the knob, and I just painted the knob in gloss black like the real cars. Now it should have a gear selector pattern on the top as well. I will have to get maybe one of those made because I don't have any little letter decals that are small enough to do that, but it should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 reverse on the top of that ball. So I would like to add that little decal. And another thing I've done, which I did off camera, was to actually assemble the little dash faces. So what I did here, I glued the clear acetate onto the back of the metal part first, and then I glued the paper gauges onto the back of the acetate and lined those up as well. So you can see they came out pretty good. And I've also, these little red, let me use my little pointer here. These little red knobs here come factory in the kit. I just cut the stems off the back of them, glued those into place. That was on top of those 2 white circles that you saw. And I just painted the outside edge of those little red lenses in matte black, if that will focus. And again, I just applied some little leftover decals. So this is the oil temperature warning light and the water temperature warning light. So that's more accurate. And I just found some black plastic rod in the parts box because the Poca kit doesn't have anything for these 2 little dials. So I've added those 2 little dials there as well. So these 2 little black dials on the bottom of the dashboard. So yeah, really happy with how that came out. So that part is basically finished now. So after the dashboard is flocked, that will be able to be glued in there. So you can see with the crystal clear in those gauges there, it gives you that glossy appearance, like there's glass in front of the gauges, like the instruments that I've done here. So that is all those little pieces done. I just wanted to get those done before I flock the dashboard, just so that I am not handling this too much after it's flocked. So just going to let this dry a little bit more, and then we are going to get into the flocking of the dashboard, the center console, and also the whole rear firewall of the interior tub. So I'll rejoin you again shortly. Okay, so let's start the flocking process. Now, I've done a separate tutorial on this before, but I will do one piece and run through with you. So what I'm doing here, this is just a couple of pieces of A4 paper stuck together. So what I'm going to do when I shake all the flocking off onto this one, I can basically fold this in half and then I can actually pour all of the unused flocking powder back into the bag so that you're not wasting a ton of it. Now, the flocking I'm using is actually from an Australian company called thepartsbox.com. Now, they have probably 30 to 40 different colors of flocking, so the most extensive I have seen as far as color range, so that's what I'm going to be using. Of course, just a little tea strainer which you can put the flocking powder in and then shake it over the wet paint. And I use Tamiya enamels because they dry a lot slower than acrylic paint, and it's basically the flocking powder sticks to the wet paint. So that's basically what you do, and whatever color flocking you are using, use a matte finish paint. So if you're doing red flocking, I would then use Tamiya flat red enamel. I never use gloss paints, I always use matte paints, and it goes on from there. So if you use a tan flocking, use a tan colored paint, basically similar color. And I'm just using a very broad paintbrush here just to apply all the paint. So what I'll do this one in real time, and then I'll do the dashboard and the other part in a time lapse just because it takes a bit of time. So let's start. So what I'll do first is just put the flocking powder into the tea strainer. Just get this one out of the way. As I say, I always do this over paper so that you can reuse all the flocking powder, because there's no point throwing it away. It's going back through a tea strainer. So that's just basically in the tea strainer. As you can see, that's the flocking powder. A bit of it going on my hand. And now the simple process. And one thing I want to note too is because this part has flocking all over it, I've just double-sided taped an ice cream stick in here so I can actually hold the part, and I've done the same with the dashboard as well. So the dashboard actually had a original screw mount in it, so I've just put the pocket screw back in there, drilled a hole through an ice cream stick, and then I can actually hold the part and maneuver it around. So that's a good idea to do those. Now let's do some flocking. So it's just a matter of, you don't want to do a super thick coating on these parts. As I said, I did already paint this black, but that was just to do the inside faces. You don't want it super thick, but you don't want it really thin either, because you do want a wet coat on here for the flocking to stick. But I just try and get some smooth brush strokes on there. I don't want it too wet. Do the other side here. Now if your paint is a bit thick, especially with the enamels, I live in hot Queensland in Australia, so sometimes the house gets very hot while I'm at work. So you can always thin the Tamiya enamel down with a bit of enamel thinner, just to make it a bit more usable. So yeah, not too thick on here. That's probably enough, and now we'll just do the top. Now I'm just going to try and avoid the area where the open gate shifter piece goes in there. I don't want that covered in flocking. So the flocking is only going to stick where the paint is. So one of the easiest mods you can do, I'm just going to coat that inside edge as well. It's best to do it all in one go so you don't have any sort of joins in doing the flocking in two stages. And that's basically about it. Just basically paint the whole part. Obviously it's enamel, as I said, it takes a lot longer to dry, which is perfect for flocking. Just put the paint out of the way so I don't get flocking in the paint. And then I just tap the tea strainer on the top. Make sure it's completely covered. Make sure you get all edges as well, because as I say, you don't want to come back after this first coating has dried and then try and do some touch-up pieces with flocking. It doesn't always work that way. And whatever doesn't stick to the paint will just be able to be shaken off. So as I said, just put as much on there as you like. Just going to top up that strainer with a little bit more flocking powder. There we go. And yeah, just a nice heavy coating on there. And as you can see, the paper's doing its job. It's catching all of the flocking powder, the excess, and that will just go straight back into the bag. Just going to add a little bit more. Oh, that bag's nearly empty. So that is a pretty good coating all over the part, as you can see there. Now there's tons on this part, so I'm just going to let that sit there for a little bit before I shake it off. I'm just going to open up a fresh bag here and add a little bit more. As I said, whatever you don't use just gets tipped back into the bag and can be reused for next time. So that is basically it, and then all you need to do is just give it a bit of a tap. So we'll just flip the part upside down. Just tap it where you don't have any flocking. And then that is going to sit to the side and dry. So as you can still see that there's wet paint underneath, but when it dries, it will be a consistent color all over. And that is a flocked center console. So that pretty much is as easy as that. As I said, it is one of the most simple mods that you can do. Just see a little hair in there. Just remove that. It is one of the most simple mods you can do in model building, is to add carpeting or whatever to your interiors of your models. So yeah, give it a go. Really easy to do, and it's very rewarding, the end result. So as I say, you can still see the wet paint through the flocking. When that dries matte, there'll be no shine to it and it'll just look like carpet. So I'm going to do the dashboard now and the interior tub. I'll do that one on time lapse, otherwise this video is going to be incredibly long. Okay, so it's a couple of days later, just been super busy with work, but really happy with how all the flocking turned out on this interior tub. So that's ready to move on to the next stage. That's the center console finished also. Now this is another little part that I added from Scale Details in the US. It's the little open gate shifter surround, and also pre-drilled and fitted the little copper bolts into the holes in that as well. So really happy with how that has turned out, and also my dashboard. So I've just done a couple of extra little things off camera. I added the little decals for the heater, and so added the little dials, just glued the little switch and the warning lamp back in, and these are some of the Tremonia metal bolt heads that I've put onto that, well, it's not really a glove box, but that panel there. And I also added a start button. I didn't want to use the key that looks a bit toyish. So to make that starter button, all I did was use some evergreen 3.2mm styrene solid tube. I just cut and sanded the end of it, sprayed it in Tamiya red, and then just glued it into place where the key slot usually goes. So only a couple of things to do now to finish this dashboard. Number one is to actually fit the heater vents or the cooling vents, and that's simply just going to push into place like so. Now I did show you how to modify that to get that fitting nice and tight, so you can see that that actually fits in there nice and tight up to the bottom of the dashboard. And the last thing to do is actually just to glue in my instrument cluster. So I'm just again going to use some of the micro scale crystal clear. It's behind this part, but I don't want to use super glue because I don't want any fogging issues of the flocking or anything else. So I'm just going to add a couple of blobs of the crystal clear, which will be in behind the face. You're not going to see that. That's all you really need on there for that. And then we'll actually just insert that from the bottom, push it back. I'm leaving the ice cream stick on here for the moment so that I can actually hold the part without touching the flocking too much. The flocking's dried, but I just try not to handle the flocking, just I don't want to wear any marks in it. And that is basically the instrument cluster in. So I think you'll agree that there's a massive improvement here over the standard grey molded plastic dashboard. Obviously we've still got the steering column to go in there. I haven't quite fitted, well, I will actually show you this. So that is the micro scale crystal clear that I used for the horn button, and it actually does look like a real horn button on a real steering wheel. I just have to add the little silver rivets around that horn button, but I'll do that in the next episode. But to give you a little bit of a look, that's basically how the dashboard and steering wheel is coming together. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up all the mods I want to do to this dashboard. Really happy with how that came out, and also the center console and the interior tub as well. So starting to look a lot more detailed than the standard kit. So I think this episode now is going to be well over an hour long, so I'm probably going to call it there for this particular episode. So when you join me for the next episode, part 5, going to continue on with the interior. We're actually going to apply some carbon or some Kevlar decals to the back of the seats. We're going to do those in red flocking as well. And I've got lots of other little detail parts for the interior as well. So we'll keep moving forward and working on the interior, getting all the pedals in there, the rubber floor mats, racing harness belts, all of that sort of stuff. But that's going to, as I said, wrap up today's episode. Now that the dashboard is finished, really happy with how these parts came out so far. So hopefully I'm going to have a close to an amalgam replica of my Ferrari F40. So thanks for watching. Make sure you stay subscribed so you don't miss the next episode. You won't have to wait as long for the next episode. I'm going to continue working on this now and start getting some footage for the next episode, part 5. But until next time, Thanks for watching the series, and thanks for watching Rob's Model Cars.